Since the pandemic hit Indonesia, we've seen friction between the central government and local government, especially when local governments implemented their own lockdowns, only to be intervened by the central government and threatened with sanctions if those measures weren't lifted, as the central government is the only one who has the authority to implement such measures according to the law. Now we're seeing Jakarta may implement longer social restrictions, which sort of goes against the direction of the national government. And why is this important? Why am I talking about this? Well, it's interesting because decentralization began in the late 90s during Reformation and was finally implemented in 2004. But in the past 6 years or so, we've seen a lot of pullback from the big parties, PDIP, Golkar, and Gerindra, hoping to pull back some of that power from the regional governments and bring it back to the central government and basically return the GBHN, which is the state policy guidelines, which is brought back from the new order under Suharto, and provides continuity from president to president, with the upper house, the NPR, having more power in setting the policy and direction of the country. I interviewed Dr. Djayadi Hanan for my latest episode on Indonesia in Depth, and I asked them, what does this friction mean between the central government and local government on this push to pull back some of the power on decentralization? So I asked Dr. Djayadi, what's going to happen? He says that the impact of the pandemic was so vast and so big that it exposed the central government's weaknesses and limitations. And it also shows that the central government must work closely with the local governments, and that the local governments need to be creative with their policymaking and also to take the initiative to be able to move fast. If you look at the polls, according to Dr. Djayadi, local leaders poll higher in satisfaction when it comes to how their leaders have handled the pandemic compared to, say, national leaders. So the pandemic has weakened, not strengthened, this push for a pullback on decentralization. So it's going to be tougher for the parties in parliament or fractions in parliament to sell such measures. They're still moving forward on this. If you look in parliament, some of the bills that they're working on, but it's going to be much more challenging than they hope. So I talked about this and much more in the latest episode of Indonesia in Depth with Dr. Djayadi Hanan. Be sure to listen.